Within this class, you might have noticed that we put a lot of emphasis on the strong relationship between reading and writing. We've talked a bit about reading comprehension strategies, and one of those strategies that was put forward was developing your ability to identify organizational patterns. Organizational patterns just refers to how the author has taken the information and assembled it in order to create the coherent piece. Organizational patterns are something that experienced writers have a toolkit of potential ways that they might organize this information. And this presentation is going to go over 5 of those major ways of organizing information, which will not only be helpful in your narrative writing in terms of thinking about how you're going to tell your own story, but also just to look ahead a few weeks, you also will bring these organizational patterns into more traditional academic writing. So within this presentation, we're going to go over chronological, compare and contrast, cause and effect, problem and solution, and topical. Chronological organization refers to when events and information are written about in the order that they occurred. I think this is one of the easiest and most straightforward ways to organize your narrative, especially if you're a starting out writer, because as I always tell my students, time happened and in order for a reason, so you might as well take advantage of that. So if we're looking at a chronology, what you'll need to identify is, where do I start, right? Where does this story begin? Does this story begin when I first opened up a book? Or does this story begin the first time somebody really challenged me or made me feel either really adequate or really inadequate? And then once you have that, where do I start? You then pose the question, what happened next? So if we started at point A, what was point B? What was point C? What was point D? This is a very good strategy to use if you're telling a full story, especially one with a beginning and a middle and an end. When you're writing chronologically for the purpose of narrative, it is important to note that you're not just going to tell every single event in the order that it happened, because that's going to overwhelm your reader and it's going to make you have a difficult time deciding which details are important and which are maybe less important. So when you organize a chronology, you want to think a little bit about what is called the narrative arc. The narrative arc, this doesn't originate with me. You're going to find it in most books, movies, pieces of literature, episodes of TV, anything that's a story that you take in. There's a starting point, sometimes called the inciting incident. So what happened that began you on this particular journey? After the starting point, you have the rising action where the different forces are coming together, the tensions are coming together. You're introducing characters, you're introducing settings. And then right when things are just about as set up as they can be, you have what's called the climactic moment. Within a literacy narrative, this is the so what. This is the moment that made you tell this whole story. It's the clash of ideas. It's the moment where you, the narrator, are challenged or transformed in some way. And then after that climactic moment, you have the falling action. As a result of what happened here, I moved into life according to this pattern. Also the conclusion, and this is really where you want to make clear the so what of your narrative. The next organizational pattern that's really worth thinking about is compare and contrast. And that's when information is arranged according to how 2 or more things are similar or different from one another. So for compare and contrast, we really see that at work in the Malcolm X coming to awareness of language piece, because he's very much comparing and contrasting his experiences with what he calls the street literacy with his experiences with the literacy that he gained in prison. It can be a really powerful way of seeing difference, showing growth in your own experience, and you're going to see it in a lot of both narrative writing and analytical or academic writing. So one thing to know about compare and contrast is that there are a couple of different ways that you can organize it. So when you're doing compare and contrast, what you want to do is make some notes for yourself about the two items that you're comparing. What are the similarities and what are the differences? From there, when you actually go to write, there are two ways that you can do this. So you can write about thing A. So everything you know about this first thing, you write about it. It might be one paragraph, it might be more than one paragraph, but you're describing thing A fully. You then go on to describe thing B fully, right? So everything you know about thing B, you put in another section of the essay. And then the third part becomes the comparison. You review the work that you've done in writing about thing A, you review the work that you've done in writing about thing B, and you have a paragraph discussing the similarities and the differences and why they matter. This is effective because it really sets you up to make sure that you have a lot of commentary and you're really directing your readers to the most important similarities and differences between the two items that you're discussing. Another way of doing compare and contrast is to discuss both of the subjects of your comparison and contrast simultaneously and organize your paragraphs or your points around topics that represent the similarities or differences. So let's say I was writing an essay about these two leaves here. I might have my first paragraph might be about color. I might talk about how leaf number 1 is green, very rich looking. Leaf number 2 is black. And then after, within that same paragraph, I've talked about the color of leaf A and the color of leaf B. I would draw some sort of conclusion about this. So the differing colors give us different moods. The differing colors show us if the plant is alive or not. I would then go on and continue to do that with the different topics that I wanted to take up in my imaginary essay about these two leaves. So I might do texture, and I might do emotions invoked by seeing the different leaves. The idea here is that you do your pre-writing we talked about before, you list out your similarities and or differences, and the topic sentences or the first sentences of each section or paragraph state the similarity or difference between the two objects, and then you offer description and commentary to support it. As an organizational pattern, cause and effect refers to writing that explores causal relationships between events and their results. So what this means, how this plays out in the work that you're going to be doing, is you might choose a cause and effect organizational pattern if you feel like there was a central event or occurrence that led to other events / occurrences. When you have one event that leads directly to another event and it's sort of an isolated cause and effect, that's one way you can do it. A causal chain is when you follow a series of causes and effects. So let's say somebody felt they had a bad first grade teacher, right? So they might start their cause and effect narrative with the description of their bad first grade teacher. They would then talk about how because I had this bad first grade teacher, I didn't learn to read. Because I didn't learn to read, I was held back a year. Because I was held back a year, I felt I was deficient in some way, and I have never been confident in my reading or writing, which has held me back as a human being. That's obviously a bit of a dramatic example, but that gives you a sense of I had a bad first grade teacher, so I didn't learn to read would be one cause and effect, whereas this whole lineup here would be a causal chain. The problem-solution organizational pattern divides information into two main sections, one that states the problem and one that states the solution. Within the realm of the literacy narrative, this can be a really helpful way to show if the writer has overcome a barrier. in some way. And a barrier is, would be a barrier in this case to literacy or education. And it allows you to use the first part of the essay to explain the source of the barrier, to explain the problem. And then as the narrator, you can show how you solved this problem or how you overcame this barrier. It's a nice way to really take agency over your own journey in writing. Topical organization means that you're arranging information according to subtopics within a larger topic. This might be a good pattern to use if you feel as though you don't have one literacy moment or one education moment, but you have many moments that have led up to your whole. You can divide these moments into topics and have them be sort of distinct sections of your essay. Or you could have topics like reading, writing, math class. So if you just have sort of different sites or different moments that you want to talk about or different themes or skills, you can call those topics and divide your essay around it. The key in this kind of an essay, topics can be understood in many, many different ways, but you're going to need a strong introduction and a strong conclusion that lets the reader know what to expect. So why are we going through these topics? And a conclusion that makes sure you've threaded together and been very explicit about the connective tissue or the themes that you see drawing all of these together. As you go into this week's assignments and really continue to develop as a writer in general, know that none of these strategies necessarily exist on their own. They're all strategies that are in your toolkit that you can draw from and mix up as needed. If you start to look at the sample essays that you've read for this unit, then you'll really be able to see how, while something like the education with anxiety piece does initially really appear to be chronological, within that piece, for example, the author is comparing herself to other students. She's writing about specific moments. She might you could also look at it, you could say, well, this is a chronology, it's happening in this order, but it's also a case of identifying a problem and discussing the solution that she worked through. So these aren't rules, they're not strict, rigid implements, but they're just ways to start to think about organization, both identifying patterns as you read and planning your own patterns as you write.